So in this lecture, I just want to introduce the basic structures and concepts behind machine learning, in particular, artificial neural networks. So neural networks are actually based on biology. So the first step is we're actually going to look at how does biological intelligence work from a fundamental level. So the fundamental unit of computation in biology is the neuron. The neuron is a very simple system. The system has multiple inputs. Here you can see the dendrites, and outputs, the axon terminals. The functioning of a neuron is quite simple. It receives a certain amount of inputs. If those input signals in the dendrites are over a certain threshold, the neuron activates, and this activation essentially leads to the signal being carried on to its axon terminals to following neurons. Once a neuron activates, the signal is carried on to the tip of the axon terminals. The connection between two layers is called a synapse. So a synapse is essentially a connection. Once the signal arrives at the synapse, the activating neuron releases neurotransmitters which transmit the signal from one neuron to the other. Biological intelligence is created by large networks of neurons. Basically, a single neuron might be a very simple system on its own, but as more and more neurons are connected together through a very large network, the systems become incredibly complicated, and incredibly complex problems can be solved. For instance, here we just see a very, very small slice of a biological neural network. The human brain has over 100 billion neurons, and neurons have thousands and thousands of synapses. So overall, the human brain has well over 100 trillion synapses. As you increase the number of neurons and synapses in a network, the amount of potential combinations grow exponentially. And this means that the very, very simple neuron, as you actually scale it up, can create extremely complex and interesting systems. Let's look at an artificial neural network. So we'll start by just looking at one neuron. So the biological neuron takes inputs through its dendrites, then based on its inputs, it will either activate or not, and then this output is then carried on to the next neuron. So what does an artificial neuron look like? Well, it's very simple. You have multiple inputs, and you have a bias, and you have outputs. So the artificial neuron, which we'll call a node, so a node basically has multiple inputs coming from multiple neurons, and then a bias. This can be thought of as a threshold. It can be any number. Depending on the intensity of the input signals into the neurons and the bias, the node or the neuron will determine the output to the following neurons. Now, biological neurons actually have a binary output. They're either on or off. However, in neural networks, we prefer not to use a step function, a binary step function. We prefer to use a continuous function. Very, very simply, an artificial neuron is just a node where you have multiple inputs, you have a fixed bias, and these inputs go through a function. The function calculates the output, and it outputs to the next neuron. Now, putting it all together, you can actually assemble these artificial neurons into a neural network. I want to start by mentioning the universal approximation theorem. The universal approximation theorem states that a feed-forward network with a single hidden layer is sufficient to represent any function, but the layer may be infeasibly large and may fail to learn and generalize correctly. What this basically means is that the neural network, as long as it is large enough, has the capacity to solve any problem. It can represent any function, and neural networks are extremely powerful and have the capacity to do really incredible things. Just as our human brain is a biological neural network, an artificial neural network might even potentially have the same capacity to be as computationally intelligent as the human brain. Running a neural network is generally computationally fast, and neural networks can be extremely powerful. The primary limitation is the learning rate and the large volume of computation and data required for training. Finally, I just want to introduce the basic structure of an artificial neural network. An artificial neural network has three main parts, and we call these layers. So you have the input layer, you have the hidden layers that can be multiple, and then the output layer. The input layer, that is basically the signal that is going into the network. And this, as long as it's numeric, can essentially be anything. If you are doing image recognition, every single node in the input layer could take in the color or brightness of a pixel. If you're doing a medical classification algorithm, it could be binary data, such as is it male or female, 0, 1, is there pre-existing condition. As long as it's numeric, it's any input. The hidden layer, this is where the bulk of the computation happens. And these neurons or nodes take the signal in from the input, and then it carries on through the multiple or the single hidden layer. And then the output is the final layer through which you get your desired results from your neural network. Say you want to determine whether an image is a dog or a cat. Well, the output layer could be set up in a way that there's two nodes, and one node representing cats, one node representing dogs. And if the node representing cats is higher, it's a cat. If the node representing dogs is higher, it's a dog. So as you can see, you can set it up however you want. Now this structure of input layer, hidden layer, output layer is the essential structure of neural networks, and we're going to be working with that carrying on.